Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Big Lawyering Episode 2, Learning the Curve. I have Adam Yohanan and Kyle Harbaugh with me again today, and we're just getting into, what it is to be a big law attorney, how to thrive, how to survive, how to keep sane, but also kind of how to make the most of what you're doing. And so Kyle's going to be our moderator again today. And we're just really going to get into the day to day of being a big law attorney. And so I'm going to have Kyle introduce himself and then Adam, and then we'll get to it.
Hi, everyone. Kyle Harbaugh here with Chief Go Officers. We help law firms grow and operate better. And I love talking to these two. I'm so glad that we get another chance to talk about big lawyering. And Adam, I'll hand it off to you now.
Adam. I used to work as an associate at Milbank and Wilkie in the leverage finance groups on the borrower and lender side. And 3 years ago, I left to start my own law firm doing small business transactions.
And Adam, you want to tell them the name of your law firm in case they need
Yes,
some business?
yes, Yohanan Law. You can find us on LinkedIn or yohananlaw.com.
All right.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, guys, I wanted to jump back in kind of where we left off. We were talking about the long hours, how people can navigate that, the overwhelm that you might feel, the level of autonomy that you have within the firm. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more. How did you navigate expectations when it came to your being available for the law firm?
Adam, I'm going to let you start.
That's a tough one because you have to decipher between advice that the firm gives you that is meant to be taken literally and advice that is not meant to be taken seriously at all. So you have to figure out what the unspoken rules are of your specific group. So I think that process starts during the summer associate phase. If you do that at the firm, when you choose the practice area, you have to not just ask the partners, but you need to ask some of the unbiased people, like the very young associates who are so young they haven't like taken sides yet, and they'll just be honest, because there may be an expectation that you just take on as much work as they give you. At the same time, then there's other groups where the expectation is a little more reasonable, where they might have a person who in the group, like a non-lawyer who manages everyone's availability. Maybe you could go to that person and say, oh, I have too many deals right now. So all these things are going to depend. If it's a larger group, one benefit is they have more associates, so it's easier to balance things out. If it's a smaller group that's still very busy, then you might have less flexibility. So I think it's important to go into this knowing that it does vary a lot. The standards are high in every context, but there's huge variation on what the specific rules are.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, for sure it really depends on your practice group. And I think ultimately, Adam kind of already hinted at it. Like, you have to communicate at the end of the day. Like, people don't always know what you're doing. So like being under the assumption that everybody in your practice group knows exactly like what you have on your plate, especially in a larger practice group. Is like a bit unreasonable. So making sure that you're like constantly communicating kind of either if you don't have enough work, which, I think that's important too. Especially when you're a new attorney. I don't know about Adam, but if I didn't have like deals like falling like everywhere around me earlier on in my career, I thought something was wrong. Like, it was like, wait, do they still like me? Because especially in a transactional group, like I feel like we would have these, like 3 to 4 weeks of like absolute madness trying to close a deal. And then you might get like a 2 week lull, where it's kind of like, wait, like, am I still in the practice group? Is it okay if I go home? And so like I think managing your own expectations as well is really important. So like that for me, like I felt like that was my issue was I had a really hard time managing the opposite of what I was told, because I went in expecting to kind of be like run ragged, working 24/7. And so when I wasn't having those like 20-hour days, it was really hard for me to adjust to like a 10-hour day, which you're like, whoa, that's still a lot of hours, Aurea. But they told me people were going to take advantage of me. So like those were my expectations. And I think also just like making sure you take time off. We didn't really talk about that last episode, but taking time off was really helpful for me because it always gave me time to kind of like regroup, think about how I had been doing, have like legitimate questions when I come back from my vacation. And I always, I kind of like mixed it up. I found myself either taking like a long weekend or I would take a couple of weeks. So like I would take maybe like a couple long weekends in a quarter. And then like at the end of like a really dramatic deal closure, I'd be like, all right, guys, I really need like 2 weeks to like recuperate. And I was lucky to work at two firms where that worked out like 99% of the time. So
That sounds nice. Because I've been in situations where
Mhm.
you take time off and it's almost like a punishment. The work just keeps piling up on your desk as you go. It's like, but I wasn't there. Well, you still
Mhm.
have the same amount of workload that you would normally expect assigned to you.
Oh,
So
the
you
work,
just,
the
yeah,
work was there when I came back. It was definitely there, but I think what was nice was I always worked in groups where people were willing to, take on additional work so you can have your time off. And so there was a lot of like give and take, which I
mm,
loved, especially like at the first firm I worked at. That's where I like really experienced like I would get like a 3-day weekend, like, a couple times in a quarter, plus like a week or two off. Like that was to me like a sweet deal. So it made me want to kind of like show up and work harder because like I knew, you know, I had something to kind of look forward to at the end, which was nice.
yeah, that's a great point. I could definitely see how that would work. But
Hmm.
if you're kind of like, I can't ever take any of this vacation time because the work is just going to keep flowing. That can be difficult.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, for sure.
So wanted to talk to you guys about like billing the hours, prioritizing assignments. Like, how did you manage that? What were some tricks, some tips that you have regarding managing your workload?
One trick that I think works really well is to get your time recorded quickly and also use what you have in your control to make sure that your hours don't drop too low to the extent you can control that. And often
Hmm.
you can more than you think. And the reason that's good, it will prevent a nightmare scenario where you get dumped with so much stuff out of nowhere. And now you have a really uncomfortable week or 2 weeks where you just have way too much.
Hmm.
Keep in mind, you only need 40 hours a week on average to hit 2,000 hours in the year. So if the firm sees that you're hitting that all the time somehow based on whatever deals are coming to you through whatever channels they're coming, they're not going to single you out as someone to assign more deals to. So if you want a smoother ride, if you want to avoid going up and down to the extent you can avoid that, try to bill more on projects that maybe don't need to be done right away when you're slow. So if you're slow on urgent tasks, maybe look at one of your deals and say, you know what, I'm pretty early on this. Normally I leave certain tasks towards later in the deal when we're closer to closing. But you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and knock out these documents right now and just get the ball rolling. And then that has two good effects. One, you keep your hours at a stable median. So everyone assumes you don't need more deals. And then on that deal you're on, it's less stressful because if something pops up, you've already gotten the easy stuff done. So that's very hard to do when you're always coming off of a really tough stretch because you really feel like you need that rest and you're like, oh, great, there's nothing this week I have to do. Let me just put in 30 hours or so. I would recommend against that and try to keep it at 40. And if you do less than 40, let that be only because there was truly nothing that you could have done. You had done all the work that could have been on your plate, and maybe it's just slow. And that's the nature of all these big law practice areas, because they go with the economy. Like right now, I'm sure a lot of people are slow in big law M&A. But the question for those people is, for the deals that you do have, what work could you be doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is one good approach. But this is all highly dependent on practice areas. As you can see, I'm more of a defensive biller. Aubrey is more of offensive. So you have to remember that what these firms need is they need a lot of solid players to make money. Like they really make money on people who are good. And maybe they make partner people who are great, but that doesn't mean they don't like someone who's good, especially if you're younger. So if you're second or third year and you're good, they're hoping you'll stay many more years and you're making money for the firm. There's no problem. So if that's what you want to be someone who's just good and you want them to be happy with you and not give you a hard time over anything, and you already know you're doing good work, you could still be doing good work and they're giving you a hard time because the hours aren't high enough. So make sure you're just hitting those 40s, and they're going to say, you know what, that person's a good person on the team. We're not going to bother them or be mean to them. Let's just keep them happy. And that is a good way to have a pleasant enough experience.
Yeah, I think that's like about 70% right, because it really depends on how busy your practice group was. I know, like, I can't remember a time in my big law practice where I was ever like so slow that like people were looking at my numbers. And I think part of it was like, kind of like you said, like I'm very offensive in how I work, in a sense that like I'm a front loader. So when you were talking about, kind of prepping those long-term deals, that is such my MO, where I'm like, all right, like I know this deal's not closing until like September because we got to wait for these regulation things or whatever. But I'm doing all of that prep work in the background, any kind of like any conversations I need to be having with junior associates or paralegals to make sure like they're getting like things in order that sometimes take a long time. Like for me, like I couldn't agree with you more there, because I think that's so important. But one thing I remember, my first like year working was I had a mentor who I was like, I just feel like the more I finish things early, the more work I get. And he was like, yeah, the reward for efficiency is more work. Like the better you become, the more people want you on their deals. And so like I found myself, like I remember working, 10 to 15 deals at a time sometimes, like really early on. But I personally enjoyed that because I wanted to learn the job. And I was like, listen, like if you're not doing the deals, because, a lot of people like to do extra reading and all that stuff. Like I was a kid that showed up to class because I didn't want to study. And so for me, class is doing the deal. And if you tell me, hey, Aubrey, I'm going to need you to be up 20 hours every day this week working on this deal, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, you're probably going to be learning a lot from this crazy deal. And I think eventually what happened was, I started getting this reputation as somebody who you could trust on your deals, because you knew it was going to get done. Like it didn't matter if it was the 11th hour, like it was going to get done. It was going to get done right. And people were going to be happy. Like no closings were going to be pushed because we didn't do what needed to be done. And so I love Adam's take on like, there has to be this happy balance between making sure you don't let your hours dip too much, but also being cognizant of the times when you might have to work a little bit more just because it's busier in your practice group, and being willing to do that give and take, because people remember that. People remember what your attitude was like. If you were, somebody who was willing to kind of like step up and help on another deal because it was just going haywire or whatever, like people remember that. And so having that mindset of, I'm here to learn, I want to make sure people on my team are good, because those are the people that are going to cover your vacation time when you go on vacation, and you don't want that pile left behind for you. And so like being that person kind of like giving, as much as you're taking, I think is really important.
I agree. I just want to add, no matter how much you intend to be working, or if you're someone who wants to do a lot of deals versus have more time for the reading, regardless, you still want to be in demand. And it's just a question of what you do with that demand. So some people may choose to take that demand and say, you know what, everyone wants to work with me. I'm going to get so many deals and I'm going to have the best deal sheet in the whole group. Other people will take the demand and say, you know what, I'm going to be really picky with this. And since, everyone wants to work with me, I'm just going to work on the type of deals that I like to do with the partners that I like. And I'm going to have a lot of like deal selectivity, whereas maybe a less popular associate is getting stuck with whatever they have. So you can really take that in two ways, and it all depends on how the group is staffed. So some groups won't allow you to take advantage of that as much because it's a bit more of a centralized, even distribution by design. But if you're in a bit more of a free market group, and I think all groups are free market to some extent, there may be a regulator. It's just a question of how much regulating are they doing. But almost always the really high performers who've done all the things that Aubrey has said, like that could mean like you went super hard on one deal or a few deals during a really short time crunch. You put in one crazy run. That may be enough. And then you can keep doing what you want to do as long as you get that going. But they will make it, if they don't like you, they'll just make you miserable. And so you're better off working a little bit harder to make them like you. And then sort of once you have that capital, spend it as you wish, but don't take on the front end, because then it's, there's so many ways where they can still get something out of you, like without, having you do the deals that you like. So with stress reduction, it's not all about working less. It's also about like, what kind of control you have over your projects.
And I really liked Aubrey's point about your learning. Like the more volume you do, the more you learn. And having that kind of approach really does make a difference. Another thing I heard you say, Aubrey, that I really liked was, to just communicating with the team, and like, I might have to work a little bit harder now and pick up the slack for somebody else, but then, hopefully they have my back later on and they're going to do the same thing. And they're going to remember, hey, Aubrey helped make this, get this over the finish line. And so, I'm going to help her with her workload later on when maybe she wants to take vacation. So great points. So what kind of tools or resources would you recommend to manage time well?
So for me, I used the human tools more than anything when I was there, because like in Big Law, like we had like a mailing department, a document services department, and document services did like everything. At my first firm, I could even get document services to go in and like put in my markups for me. If it was busy enough. And so like I could, send a note out saying, hey, like we just got these markups, we just got these comments. Can you put them in? And then be spending the time going through the document to make sure that there was cohesion, rather than kind of like sitting down trying to like figure out handwriting and all of that, like having somebody else kind of do that hard work. Like I never formatted a Word document. I don't know how to do that. But I remember having colleagues who struggled to give off that kind of work. Like they felt like they needed to kind of burn the midnight oil trying to do things that like we were well within our right to be able to kind of, delegate. And so I think, starting with like delegation is so important, because it frees up your time to, kind of think more about the substantive aspect of the work rather than being a taskmaster, actually like being able to show up and like have creative ideas about how to solve a problem for the client. For me, that was really important. And I don't know if it's just because I worked before and had been, managing people before in my life. And so now it was kind of like, I don't want to like get rid of all those skills because I happen to like choose like an entry level moment in my life. It was more about, okay, how do I build using that? And then anytime we had to pilot any kind of legal tech, I was like, hey, I'll do it. Because, and again, the mindset was, if they're going to let me use this technology to make my life easier for the next 6 months, who cares if we might not have it 6 months from now? I don't care about that. I just want to like learn how to use it and use it to my advantage. And so one that I used to use was like there was this company like Reorg where they pulled all of the documents from publicly available like credit agreements, dip financings and that kind of thing. And so like you could actually go through and just pull similar deals to what you were doing and have it pull out specific provisions. So you wouldn't have to like go through the document yourself to try to find it. Like you could actually like plug in a provision and then it would like spit out, the last 10 in the last like 5 months or something like that. And so I love that because again, just freeing up my time to be more, kind of focus on that substantive work was really important to me, and really kind of like stayed on my own kind of bylaws for myself where it was like, we're here to learn. And like, now that I know how to do the task, now I want to refine how I do the task. I want to make it like, how do I get this document into tip top shape? So the partner or the senior associate that I was working with or counsel wouldn't have to like, be correcting stuff that like I should have caught, because I was too busy, and so like that for me, that was like the fun part, being able to kind of delegate off certain things so I can focus on the important part of the documents.
I agree with that exactly, and I would just add on like what's at stake if you don't do that. So I think the three things, like first of all, the human resources, much more significant at big law than at small law or in-house by a lot. And we don't need to go into like the exact details, but yeah, basically it's like secretarial style services. And I don't want to go into the details because it's different at every firm and practice. You have to figure out the details for yourself. And same with the legal tech, whatever's there, whatever's appropriate. It's a little different, but what we know for sure, there's lots of people and there's lots of tools available, and there might not be the right training and there might not be the right mentoring. You have I would say an legal ethics duty to start using it. And if you're billing more hours because you're not using it, I would say you're stealing from the client in some way. And to continue on the learning point, you're stealing knowledge from yourself because you can only put in so many hours. You might think, oh, I'll do more hours because I'm doing extra. Know that you're already going to do your max regardless. So the only question is the hours you put into the job, are you going to get something out of them that you can take with you, or you're just going to give and get nothing other than the money? And the knowledge is what's most valuable. So yeah, I think it's mandatory, and I think you have to start doing it really early, especially when you have so much of the grunge work really early. And if someone who's senior to you, they may not know the resources that well, so they may treat you like you're the resource. If that happens, no problem. You can navigate it. And it's quite possible the senior person does know how to use the resources themselves. They just don't even want to spend the time doing the delegation, and that's
Mm-hmm.
completely valid. So, and they might not teach you, and you might ask, and they still might not teach you. There are no excuses, and you may not even be so good at managing people. Just make it up as you go. You have to try. That's all I could say for the tools.
No, I think that's so important. And what you said there about like even if you've never had management skills, like you just have to like at the end of the day, just communicating your needs and not being a jerk, I think goes a whole like it
I,
goes
I
so
think that's
far.
it. That's all it is.
Well, because even if you think you're a good manager, but like you're mean to people, they're just gonna drag their feet,
Totally.
and the thing is like you don't want people you don't want people to be upset with you and not have your back because like you can't check your attitude at the door when you're trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, and most of the people who work in these roles, like this has a different name at all the firms, but I think that they call it the word processing center. Basically, people
Mm-hmm.
who fix the documents and do all the things in Word that many of us don't know how to do. They've done this a lot. They've dealt with a lot of associates. They feel bad for you to some extent. So, they're eager to help, and like they've been through like a lot of accountability. Like they
Mm-hmm.
usually get a lot of training. So it shouldn't take too much, and you just want to be specific. It's like when you're using Chat GPT. I think like many of the support people at the firm, they respond very well to specificity, basic respect, and that, yeah, I think that's all it takes.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. All right. Well, wanted to ask you, do you think there is a right person or a wrong person for Big Law? Or a right reason or a wrong reason to go into Big Law?
I think yes and no. I need it to be both for some reason. And so I think, if you're going into it because you want to be validated by like some outside force, then that's definitely the wrong reason because there's too much sacrifice involved. Like
Mm.
I don't think you can make such a big decision um because of what it costs, because it costs a lot to work in big law. I mean, it costs a lot to be a lawyer, period. But to be in a big law firm, especially in those like first 2 to 3 years, it's a lot. Like you kind of have to go in, you go in knowing you're going to sacrifice a lot. And so if you're doing it because like if I decided I want to be a big law attorney because Adam's going to be a big law attorney and I'm competing with Adam, like I'm not going to be able to like hold it together. um you know and part of it is just like it's a high stress environment. There's a ton of work to be done. Some of it urgent, some of it non-urgent, but always seeming like extremely important and necessary to be done yesterday at all times. And so like you kind of, I think, if you go in with this idea that like I'm doing this because I want other people to validate me, like that, to me that's the wrong reason. I think any other reason is the right reason. And I know that's a big statement, but
That's really interesting because last time you said like how you even found out was like somebody else in your class said, "Hey, are you doing this Big Law thing?"
mhm.
But it was kind of like a challenge almost,
Yeah,
and
like
you're like,
he basically like, and but for me it felt like expectation. It was almost like you're good enough to do this, like
mm,
you're my competition. And so in a way it was a challenge, but it was almost like a challenge to see beyond what I had already like known about what was available to me. And so like, it's funny when I think about it because I went in for the money. That's why I went in. I went in for the money, and then I was like, oh, then I got there and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Oh, they're paying me to learn. Oh, this is great, and
Yeah.
and so like for me, like that was my choice. Like my family was well aware. Like Abria is becoming a big law attorney. Like it was. I didn't have some grand, you know, reason, except this is a lot of money. They're gonna pay me this money, and they're gonna train me so I could be like a really good attorney, and I get to work on like massive deals for mega corporations and banks. Sign me up, right? And so, to me, like I was happy with my reason, but it never had anything to do with other people because, believe it or not, most people discouraged me from pursuing it. Most people were kind of like, oh, why are you doing that, and telling me about all the things I would have to sacrifice. And in my mind I thought, and like I'm gonna make more money than anybody else in my family ever made 1 year out of law school. Like it
You were
just,
willing to pay the cost. That
yeah.
cost wasn't like might have been too high for that person,
Hmm.
but not too high for you.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's interesting. And what I'm also hearing is you came for the money, but then once you found out, you stayed for more reasons, or
Yeah.
you followed through for there was more to be had than simply the money.
Yeah. Yeah. It was less a money grab and more, oh wait, this thing is like sucking me into it because of all of these other perks that I see available to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that sounds super interesting to work on these, massive $1 million, deals that sounds super exciting. Adam, how about for you? What drew you in? What kept you? All that sort of thing.
Drew me in definitely also the money. And I agree with the idea that anything other than getting other people to validate you is good, which is to say there are many other good reasons
Hmm.
as well. So I think the learning is a good one. The wanting to be in proximity to important business matters is a good one. And one that I think might be good is this idea of you see yourself in big law long term, maybe. But
Hmm.
one reason I'm not crazy about that as a reason to get into big law is because you don't really know that until you get there. So, like, one of the reasons I got in was not just the short term money of a first year associate, but I thought, oh, one day I could be like a millionaire partner.
Hmm.
But that decision was not based on an actual understanding of what that would require. It was just based on having looked up the numbers. So it was very easy to say that. So I think it's also good to want to go in just because of the doors it opens to leave or to stay.
Hmm.
So, to go in as someone who just doesn't really know, but you're like, I know I'm gonna be a lawyer, and I might as well have more options than less options.
Hmm.
That's good. And I think that's an okay reason as long as you think you can make it 3 years. Because if your goal is to open more doors, you do want to stay long enough for those doors to actually open.
Hmm.
Some people drop out after less than a year, and then I don't know that opens up any doors. So the doors don't open right away. That's a caveat. So I think the right person to get into it, I would leave it at someone who can make it 3 years, so that's all I made it. I made it what I would consider the bare minimum, and the minimum might be even higher for people in other practice areas. But yeah, I think just if you can survive the minimum, then you get the money, you get more opportunities, and ultimately you get freedom because you
Hmm.
can do something else. So you're sacrificing a little freedom for a short period of time. But I think there's many people out there who know themselves well enough to say, just based on what I've heard about big law, I can't do it for even 1 year.
Hmm.
If that's really who you are, then I would not do it.
So one of the things that we look at a lot in at Chief Go officers. We find really good fits for law firms, other professional service firms. We look at long-term goals, and so we look at what long-term goals are available on the company side, and what long-term goals does the person have. And so I wanted to ask you guys a bit more about that. Uh, what would be some reasons to go into big law if you have certain specific long-term goals?
So I would say I thought of big law as almost like a master key
Hmm.
for a legal career. It's like, it's kind of like Adam said, like if you can do the bare minimum a number of years, because you have to do it long enough to be able to demonstrate that you learned something while you were there. And anybody that knows anything about big law knows that your first year or two, unless you just like end up with maniacal people, and I like to think that I worked with a few maniacal people in my first year or two who just they didn't like the rule, they didn't like stick by the normal rules of, oh, you're a first year so you do first year work. It was kind of like a free for all, which, like a true free market, in that you could find yourself working on like an intercreditor agreement in this Levfin group 6 months in. It's completely unheard of in like a normal practice group, right? And so once you kind of figure out what you want, I think, what I loved about the big law key is that you could basically do whatever you want. You can go become a consultant. You can go in-house as an attorney at pretty much any financial institution. And I'm realizing now more and more that it doesn't even matter what your practice group, as long as you've done the bare minimum, you could end up, you could like leave like 3 to 4 years out of big law and be like a vice president at some bank, or some financial services, company, or just, some larger organization relatively quickly, or like a senior director or managing director, depending on what your background was before you did big law too. And so like think of it as almost like building a toolbox based on kind of what you already have in your repertoire, and where you're really trying to go, I think is really important. And so for me, like I went into it knowing, okay, if I want to be a judge one day, you know um this has to be one of my steps that I take, because I'm looking at, most of the judicial careers, for federal judges, and guess what? Most of them did big law, you know? And I didn't have a T14 school under my belt. So I knew I needed the big law part, right? And I think like kind of knowing what you already have in your toolbox is really important as you make that decision. Because like, to be honest, if I were a Harvard law grad, I might not have done big law. I would have gone and done something else, mostly because I know having that Harvard name was going to open similar doors to like a big law door, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Adam, what do you have to say about long-term goals? Who's a good fit?
I think from the firm's perspective, they don't care too much because they're playing a numbers game. So I think with a lot of the firms you work with, Kyle, they cannot afford to just hire a dozens of associates and assume that the statistics will make a few potential partners. So that's not going to work for a small firm. But for a big firm, they kind of don't put much into it. In that we kind of talked about the hiring process, how it's kind of just like a 15-minute like vibe check, and they're not really grilling you on your long-term goals like a more high impact hiring process would. And so they're just playing the numbers. But from the associate's perspective, I think also you don't really need to think that long term. And some people are a little worried that when they're a junior associate, they need to like be on a certain level in case they want to be partners. They have to be at the top right from the start, like be a top biller every single year. And it's true, many partners were top billers every single year. But I have a theory that it's really just the last few years that determine whether you make partner. And I think it's a coincidence, like a causative coincidence, that by the people who put in the most time in the first few years and who rise to the highest level of skill the first few years tend to be the ones who are at the highest levels in the latter years as well. So you see that correlation. But ultimately, you can change your mind in year 4 and say, you know what, I've been a solid associate. Like, they like me, but they probably weren't thinking about me for partner. You can completely level up your game at that point, and that could work, probably will work, because the memories are so short. So likewise, in the opposite direction, if you stopped being so good, they would stop liking you pretty quickly. And the reason these shifts happen is because the job descriptions are different at the senior versus the lower level. So lower level, it's going to favor people with the really good organizational skills and, you know, ability to work hard, you know, efficient, all those things, just project management. Then as you get older, maybe you're talking on the phone more, maybe you're negotiating, you're not doing so much organization. So maybe you were bad at the organization, now you're getting away with being bad because the junior associate is good. And then, you know, maybe you get even more senior, and now it's about like who can hang out with the partners in the other group. So it's, you do have to be adaptive as you get older. So all that is to say, I don't think you need to plan long term. I would plan short term. Just plan how you're going to get through the next year. Think about what you want to accomplish that year. Like, what do I want to learn this year? Just focus on getting better, and don't worry too much. So many associates, they worry so much. What's the perception of me? So maybe, you know, and which could be different than your actual skill. So they're like, oh no, like, I'm worried so much about just how I'm viewed, but I'm not worried about like how good I actually am. I would say just focus on how good you actually are, even knowing that there's a risk that that won't be reflected in your perception. If that happens and there's a mismatch, you can lateral to a new firm and right from the beginning start being really good, and they're not going to require that you pay your dues over time. If you just lateral and you're good right away, they'll just put you to the top right away. And so, but you can't, if you don't have the skills, then you're definitely, there's nothing that can be done at that point. So the bare minimum is to learn the stuff, however it's comfortable for you. Maybe that means as many deals as possible. Maybe that means some people hit the books. They spend their weekends like reading old credit agreements and merger agreements and studying like that. So whatever your style is, that'll serve you no matter what you do. And then you'll worry about whatever the new skills that are being asked of you as you get older. You'll worry about that when the time comes. But you can't really get there without the more fundamental skills.
No, I think that's so important. And I love how we're like really plugging for learning in this episode. Because like ultimately that's what matters. Like, you know, like the money's good, the connections are good, but like what good is an opportunity if you can't show up and like put your best foot forward in that new opportunity that presents itself to you, whether it's going, you know, going in-house, getting an opportunity to become a judge later on in your career, starting your own firm. Like how are you going to feel confident starting your own firm if you've been kind of like hiding behind project management, for the first 5 years of career? Like it doesn't really work, and so like I think I love this idea of like having a balance of, whether however you need to learn it, making sure you're learning it, but ultimately like you have to be able to apply the knowledge that you're learning. And I hate that I'm actually saying this publicly because it's one of my least favorite quotes, but in this case, experience is the best teacher. Because if you're not actually experiencing the process of the pressure of figuring out something for a client in the moment. And you always like, you're not always going to have months to figure out an answer for your client, right? And so, you have to get that practice. And so that's where like the deal work comes into play. And I'm kind of like really beating that dead horse, because I think that's something that people complain a lot the most about in big law, is how many hours they have to put in at times. And I think when you shift that mindset from, oh, I got to put in these hours, to I get to learn something new on this matter or on these matters, then, even your perspective, even as you're doing a task, it's less about, oh, I need to complete this task. And now, oh, why is this part of a deal or litigation important? Like, why is like why are they having me do this, right? And so now you're being more thoughtful about how you're doing the work, and kind of gleaning as much as you can, no matter what you're doing, and recognizing no task is too small. Let me tell you, I've seen deals get messed up because a signature page didn't show up when it was supposed to, and so like, who's in charge of signature pages today, as you're listening to this? Like, that's a really important part of the deal, because if nobody signs in the end, there's no closing.
Yeah. No, that's great. And that makes so much sense. I mean, you pay, lots and lots of money to learn. Why not go get paid to learn instead?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so much. So look at it as an opportunity to gain more skills. You can lose all the money you make. You can't lose the knowledge that you take away from that experience. So I think there is a lot to be said about education and
Mm-hmm.
learning, and putting yourself in unique situations and experiences that a lot of people don't have access to.
No, for sure.
All right, so I wanted to ask you. People often describe big law as the golden parachute. I wanted to ask what it felt like for you. Was it a soft landing, or did it feel like something else?
I'll say mine. So I started in the middle of the pandemic, and for
Mm,
me, it was a soft landing, and it was it was one of those things where I really got to just focus on work, and not as much on like the office politics, because I was working remotely from kind of day one of my career. And I did that for like the first 2 years. And so for me, it was a soft landing, because I got to do exactly what I said I was going to go in to do. Like, I was going to learn as much. And so my hours were spent really just like drilling down knowledge and learning. And then, not being able to go anywhere for almost 2 years, I got to stack a lot of, you know, I really like my Scrooge McDuck vault was looking sexy. I'm not gonna lie. It was nice. It was nice. And I didn't have to buy any clothes, like, so I was like this rich I was rich. Like, I had like rich auntie vibes, you know. And I remember I used to treat myself every other month with a new pair of foam posits, which is not very expensive. It's like well, maybe it is. Expensive is relative. But it was like a $200 pair of sneakers, basketball sneakers, that like nobody who knows me, nobody who knows me in my public life knows that I go around in these, like I walk around the streets in basketball sneakers, because that's just not how they envision me. But like, I racked up probably like, I don't know, 20 pairs of those suckers during that time. So maybe that's unhealthy. So for me, it was a soft landing, because I got everything I prayed for. Was it hard? Yes, but I don't know of anything in life that isn't hard. I think it's just a matter of like choosing your hard, and deciding how you're going to tackle it. And so that's what I did.
yeah, I hear you. and you get to choose your hard. Everything's
Mhm.
hard. That, and if it's, I'll also say, if it's not hard, is it really worth doing? So,
Some easy things are worth doing.
yeah, don't get me wrong. Things, there are good, easy things that are worth doing for sure, but
Yeah.
it's fun to do something challenging and see what you're made of and whatnot.
Yeah.
Say, Adam, how about for you? Golden Parachute, was it a soft landing or something else?
For me, it was actually a difficult transition out because we've been talking about how one of the big benefits is you get to work on important matters. And so some people, maybe that's a form of vanity, or it's just more intellectually stimulating, probably a little bit of both. But when I left Big Law, the first thing I did was go in-house for one summer for only 3 months. And I could not do that job because the quality of the deals that I was working on and the quality of the work in so many ways was so much worse and less exciting. And it's kind of hard to explain until you do the Big Law thing, because when Big Law, that's kind of what gets you through it. Is just, it feels so good to be working on important matters. So that's what made it a tough exit for me. But during that summer of in-house, it was kind of great to make almost the same salary while working a 9 to 5. And so that's what makes the initial exit very golden. But I was now at a stage in my career where I was starting to think more long term. And I said, don't think long term the first few years of law because you just have to get through it. But year 4, I think it's time to think long term. So I'm
Mhm.
at the end of year 3, entering year 4, and I'm like, where is my career going? In terms of my practice, nowhere good doing these dinky little deals. That's the first issue. Financially, where am I going? I have a good salary today as a 4th year, but when I'm a 14th year, my salary is going to be exactly the same. I'm not going to get a pay raise at this in-house job. And that's kind of the way it almost always
Mhm.
goes, unless you really shake things up in some way. So that kind of depressed me, thinking like, I'm not going anywhere with my skills financially. And when things kind of fell apart after the first summer with the in-house, I decided I would rather give up that amazing financial stability and keep the dream alive of, I might get rich and I'll at least get to do interesting deals. And that's how I ended up going solo. But it's an individual choice. Like, I didn't have any kids or family or anything like that. If I had had like a family or something like that, I'm sure I would have stayed in the in-house job, and all my colleagues had families. So the in-house jobs, it's a lot of people who have families because that's a more important part of their life than feeling stimulated by the deals they're doing. But for me, like, my work was still and still is central. So it you have to be prepared to give that up. And I think a lot of the people who stay, who really love it, they can't give up the intellectual stimulation.
So it sounds like you weren't really learning, like we were talking about earlier. That
Exactly. And I think in some ways you go in house, there is some element where it's good learning because you're learning new things. So I think
sure.
that part is intellectually stimulating, the retooling of having to learn new skills. But as far as your core practice area, whether it's M&A or finance or whatever it is, you're not going to find more quality work in-house. It might be more broad. You might get to do a few new things, might get to learn something about employment law or whatever, but you're not a more advanced finance or M&A lawyer.
That makes sense.
And you're not valued. So they might be treating you poorly at the firm, but they still value you, even if they might not like you, they might not be nice to you, but you are valued. And you're not valued as an in-house counsel because you don't make money for the company. So at normal companies, the people who are valued are the salespeople and the people who do whatever the job is.
bring in the money.
Yeah, somehow bring in the money, not say no to things. So
Mhm.
in-house counsel not appreciated by your coworkers.
I'm gonna stay out of that one because I personally have never gone in house, but I really loved what you said though about how there's this transition in, but all into big law, but that transition out can sometimes feel like almost like a culture shock, especially if you're like starting your. To me, it's like you start your career out, on a high, you know it's like everything's moving really fast, like it's like it feels, even if you're complaining, you're enjoying it. It's one of those, it's like even your complaints sound like a brag, like, oh, I had to work like 36 hours this weekend, and like and kind of one upping each other. But then like you actually miss it after you leave, and that, for me, that was something I experienced with Scrappy Go Project as well. Like once I decided to go do consulting, I was like, girl, on what planet did you think you would be able to just not be a lawyer anymore? And so it's like, I think, that's something we'll definitely get into next episode, because we're going to talk about like how do you kind of like figure out if you want to move up the ranks, or if you want to transition into something different because you've decided on something different, and we're going to talk a little bit about like how you start developing business. So Kyle's going to shift from moderator to really just kind of like having a conversation about how do we like develop business, whether we're trying to move up the ranks in a firm or we want to start our own firm, because I think those are like valuable things for us to, share with people that are listening. But thank you, people. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you have any questions, definitely drop us questions, and we will try to address them next episode. Thank you, Kyle and Adam, for giving of your time again on this Friday afternoon. And it's Father's Day this weekend, so we're gonna tell Kyle happy early Father's Day.
Thank you.
But this was a really great conversation. Thank you, guys.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed it.